Hi, I'm Sahithi, and I'm a member of the MIT Global Health Alliance campaigns team. And we are doing this interview as part of our organization's mission to bring awareness to public health issues. Specifically, we wanted to bring awareness to diabetes since it's so widespread in the world, and World Diabetes Day is coming up this Saturday. Today, we have Dr. Langer here to answer some questions about his research. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bob Langer, and I'm one of 11 institute professors at MIT.
So, Dr. Langer, how did you become interested in doing diabetes research? And how has your research in this area progressed over the past few years?
Well, we've been doing diabetes research, starting in the really things that related to diabetes, starting ever since I was a postdoc at Boston Children's Hospital in 1974. And also, when I came to MIT in 1977, our earliest work led to the first what are called angiogenesis inhibitors. We published this in Science in 1976. And later that would help set the stage for work done by Genentech and other companies that created the first drugs to treat diabetic retinopathy. But also we did a lot of work early on uncontrolled release of insulin and other molecules. And some of that work also would lead to new treatments for very long-acting molecules, glucagon-like peptides to treat type 2 diabetes. The last few years, a lot of our focus has been working on creating an artificial pancreas where we could encapsulate islet cells and put them in what I'll call an immunoprotective barrier. So that work has been funded by the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation in large part, and also the Helmsley Foundation. That's going very well. We have published about 9 articles with Dan Anderson, who was one of my former postdocs, now a full professor at MIT, and others. And it led to a company called Sigalon, which is trying to develop this. But that's very exciting because the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation contacted me in 2007, 2008 to see if we could address this problem. And our lab at MIT, I think, has made really good progress so far.
Yeah, thinking about your work with creating artificial pancreas, could you explain a little bit how that works and what might be some benefits of this approach compared to traditional insulin delivery systems?
Sure. Well, basically, I mean, what you want to do is make things as physiologic as possible, and you also want to make it glucose responsive. And actually, we've been working on strategies, with designing molecules that could do that. But this would really be something like a pancreas itself, which has the beta cells in it. But one of the issues is that the beta cells get destroyed when you inject them into the body, so by the immune system. So what we've been able to do is design a system that has that's injectable and has pores in it. And the idea is that by getting the right pore size, like insulin and glucose can go back and forth through the system and make it glucose responsive. But big molecules like antibodies and also even bigger things like immune cells can't get in. And so that's what we've been doing. But I think the key advance has been that people tried to do that before, but they could never make the immunoprotective barrier really what I'll call super biocompatible. So you get fibrous tissue overgrowing it. And Dan and I and our team at MIT have figured out ways that, to understand that and at least in non-human primates, stop it.
Mhm. Yeah, that sounds really great. How do you see your innovations improving access to insulin or addressing some shortcomings with how insulin is provided currently?
Well, I think if we go to that last area, I mean, you wouldn't have to produce insulin. If the last area succeeds, I mean, then the cells make the insulin. I mean, you wouldn't be necessarily need insulin shots, or you'd need a lot less. So, I mean, that's the hope and the dream.
Mhm. So I'm curious as well, what do you think is the timeline of implementing your innovation, and do you think it could be done on a large scale?
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, like I say, there's many areas. I mean, so that we're working on. I mean, so but all of the ones that we've worked on so far, have been implemented. Like I mentioned, the the drugs that are treating diabetic retinopathy. That's certainly been implemented on a large scale. So have the ones that giving glucagon like peptides. Uh, these systems for cell therapy, I think, could be implemented on a large scale. We're working with really good manufacturing companies at Sigalon. That's actually why we set the company up, to address the very point you mentioned. And finally, Gio Traverso, who's a professor at MIT, and we've developed a way of developing oral insulin. And on that, we published that in Science last year. This is a pill you could swallow that could actually inject the insulin. And in that particular case, we're working with the company Novo Nordisk, and they're also a very large insulin manufacturer, and they're working on doing the manufacturing for this little swallowable system. So I'd like to think that, not necessarily because of ourselves, but because of the companies we've helped set up and because of the partners we're working with, that the issues you mentioned can be addressed.
Hmm. So you mentioned that you've also worked on an oral pill to deliver insulin. Could you talk a little bit about um, some of the science behind how that delivery system works and some benefits of that, as well as opposed to like an insulin injection or other um, more traditional methods?
Sure. So is this being recorded video, or just orally?
This is being recorded video, but if you'd be more comfortable, we
No,
could
no,
just
no.
upload a
Actually, what I'm
transcript.
going to do is go further. Since it's video, I'll show it to you. Let me just hold this up, and I will show you the system. So here it is. It's very tiny, but you can put it in a capsule. And the idea, this is what people in the lab did. Alex Abramson and Professor Traverso and others that were working on this. So basically, the idea is you've got this tiny little system, but inside, and if you look very closely, it's probably hard to, but if you look very closely, there's a little hole in this silver part. So the idea is, behind that, there's a needle, but the needle is made almost of 100% insulin. And behind that needle is a spring. And the spring is cocked so that if it were able to be released, it would just shoot the insulin right through that hole. And if it were in the stomach, right into the stomach. And by the way, reason we feel it's going to be safe is Dr. Traverso. He's also a gastroenterologist, and he treats people all the time that have razors in their stomach and other things, and they seem to do fine. Not that we're recommending it, but also there's very little pain in the stomach. And this is something, injecting in the stomach is something that gastroenterologists do, without a problem. But they always go in from the back end. We're actually now going to try to go in through the front end. So anyhow, the idea is you swallow this, you have the needle behind it, and you have the spring behind that. And then you don't want it to be released immediately, right? Because you're in the mouth. So we have a sugar cube that is, it's actually a sugar glass that the spring is embedded in. And because it's a glass and because it's solid, that prevents the spring from being released. But what you can do is, by what's called osmosis, water going in, and you can time this by the thickness of the cube. About 30 minutes later, after you swallow it, the water will come in, it'll break the sugar glass, that releases the spring, and the needle then just gets shot right out because the spring is released. But there's one last issue, and that is that how do you know that this particular part where the hole is facing the stomach wall? So what Alex and Gio and others did is they modeled this system after what's called a leopard tortoise. So that has a weight distribution that no matter what you do, it always falls with this on the bottom. And I'll just do it. Oops, I'll do it again. So it always lands that way. No matter what you do, it'll always land that way. You can do it 1,000 times and it will always land that way. Even when I dropped it, it landed that way. And that's because of the weight distribution, because of the modeling. So actually, we've done this in pigs and dogs, and it's worked very well. It works as well as the oral injection. It appears to be very safe. And so that's what we've done in the case of the oral insulin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on where the field of diabetes research is headed in the next few years or maybe even the next few decades?
Well, I think in the next few years, better insulins are being developed. I mean, the one I talked about being oral is one of them. I think in the next few decades, I do hope that we'll certainly have an artificial pancreas of some kind. I mean, so that people will not need to give themselves insulin and you can make it glucose responsive. So, and I also hope that drugs to treat some of the complications of diabetes will also exist. I mentioned some examples like to treat the eye diseases, but I hope that there'll be others. So and so all those things I hope will happen.
Mhm. Certainly. And could you talk a little bit about the extent to which you collaborate with industry or public health organizations within your research and within um, addressing diabetes?
Yeah, well, we work, like I say, with Sigalon because we started that out of the work that the Juvenile Diabetes funded. We work with Novo Nordisk, as I mentioned, on the oral insulin. We do a lot of work with certain foundations. In fact, they've been very supportive. The two major foundations have been the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation and the Helmsley Foundation. So those are some of the major ones that we've worked with. But of course, the National Institutes of Health helped fund a lot of our very, very early work, and that was extremely helpful too.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much. Those are all the questions that I have. Is there anything else you want to share about your research or about diabetes?
I'm fine. No, I think those are good. Those are very, very good questions. If I can help more, let me know.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.